Far Cry 5 was a game that disappointed me. It's a mediocre shooter that loses its luster within the span of a day of playing it. After the honeymoon period of playing it, it goes from excitement of a new adventure to corporate art, devoid of any sense of heart or passion. Its characters have no personality, and its writing is so stilted that it broke any sense of enjoyment after my first day of playing it. So why did it turn out this way? What could have been done to save it? And what did I learn from it? Well, hold on to your lacy undergarments as we dissect Far Cry 5. Far Cry 5 is another installment in Ubisoft's Far Cry series. Set in fictional Hope County, Montana, Far Cry 5 has you take on the role of the Deputy, a nameless, faceless, blank slate who is tasked with apprehending Joseph Seed, the leader of a doomsday cult called Project at Eden's Gate. The Far Cry series has always had the theme of making the antagonist the star of the show. Once again, we are following that exact formula where the villains are front row center. The one thing that's different this time around is that everyone who isn't a villain doesn't really have much of a character. Allied NPCs have no real sense of investment outside of maybe one story mission per character. Other than that, it doesn't feel like I'm working alongside a crew of strongly written characters or even a ragtag group of outcasts. They're just, select which archetype character you feel will work and then go to town. I personally chose Just Black and Boomer since I enjoyed picking off enemies in stealth as opposed to guns blazing. Side note, Sharky was completely and totally useless, and I recommend never using him. There is only one mission in the whole game that actually does make me give a damn about the cast, which involves driving a pregnant woman to a clinic. Other than that, Far Cry 5 is devoid of any type of passion in it. It's formulaic and lacks character progression and investment. The formula being, drop the character into a giant sandbox filled with collectibles and side objectives. I'm familiar with that setup. So long as the story can make the rampant collecting and alternative objectives help flesh out the story, a la Infamous, Spider-Man, etc., then you've got nothing to worry about. Unfortunately, you're playing a nameless, generic slab of fresh meat with no means of being able to craft your own identity. When you put a sandbox on rails, it becomes bland and uninspiring, and that's unfortunately what we got. Far Cry 5 has an abundance of bad decisions which really affect the immersion of it. I'm going to dissect the problems I had, one by one, and hopefully find ways to patch them up. First on the docket, the multiplayer is atrocious. Now, making custom maps is an interesting idea. A lot of really cool and interesting designs can be made in the custom level editor, but the moment I jump onto the actual player versus player style battles, the combat loses its polish. When I get behind the controls, it feels like I'm playing an ancient version of Call of Duty or Counter-Strike, so I'd like things to flow a bit more fluidly. Licensed music in Far Cry 5 is horribly utilized. Throughout your adventure in Montana, there might be times where you'll hear music playing on a random radio in camps or in cars, however most of the music you'll hear is the original score played throughout. It's almost to the point where I feel like the actual licensed music shouldn't even be in this game. These aren't just no-name bands, by the way. I distinctly remember hearing Black Rebel Motorcycle Club and The Vines being used. Out of those two bands, only Get Free by The Vines is actually involved in a story mission. It's so on the nose that the mission itself is called Get Free. I hated it for being too obvious. If I had my way, I would have renamed the mission, changed the song to Stop by Jane's Addiction, and actually make the NPC we're trying to protect someone the player should actually care about. Next up, the catch and release style of narrative breaks with Joseph's lieutenants. Before trying to capture the illustrious big bad of Far Cry 5, you have to take back the regions controlled by his family. John, Jacob, Jingleheimer Schmidt, his name is my name too, and Faith. Before taking his family members down, you get captured a total of 3 times, per lieutenant. With the exemption of the one attempt by Faith Seed, nobody else tries to kill you. What the hell, Ubisoft? Narrative-wise, the player is the only character capable of completely stopping the Seeds from locking down Hope County. I doubt Joseph is trying to keep us safe so we can be converted to the Project of Eden's Gate later. I get that you would like to build up the tension before the final confrontation, but there has to be a better way to have these intimate moments with the mini-bosses without overstaying their welcome. This is the narrative equivalent of the boy who cried wolf. Eventually, you gotta turn to the bad guys and go, man, you really suck at your job. That's just bad writing. Actually, let's run with this idea of Project at Eden's Gate being incredibly incompetent, because it's the only thing that makes me deal with the stupidity of the beginning of the game. From the moment you start Far Cry 5, you are given exposition in the form of documentary footage from characters who are central to the game's plot. In order to explain my problem with this, we need to go into film theory. Documentary exposition is used quite often in films. It's a quick and dirty way to bring the audience up to snuff. Usually you use a voiceover from one central character while showing B-roll for visuals, a la Alice in Resident Evil. You can also accomplish this style of exposition by using documentary/found footage that doesn't involve the main cast in any way. When you start utilizing the main cast in documentary-style presentation, it opens up a narrative cycle, one in which the audience assumes that what we are playing through is the recollection of past events playing out. Martin Scorsese utilizes this kind of exposition in Goodfellas and then alters the structure in Casino, effectively pulling the rug out from the audience. Mafia 3 and True Crime Streets of LA, as well as countless others, use this style of documentary exposition in this intended way. As soon as the footage came on, I was immediately given the impression that the characters were speaking in the past tense about the events in this game. When you reach the game's conclusion, there is no way the loop can complete. So what can be done to stop that? How about using characters who you don't meet in the storyline? Done. It's not even that difficult. Hell, you can use a character who's mentioned, like Gary Fairgrave, who actually fought Peggy's before his death. Plus, considering how the seeds have everything locked down by the time you show up, it seems uncharacteristically sloppy that they let people who are vocal in their opposition live. But I digress. One of the things I personally had a problem with Far Cry 5 is its lack of social commentary. Before you get uppity in the comments, I realize that this is a personal preference that shouldn't be something that I hold against the developers of a video game. At the time of Far Cry 5's launch, the socio-political climate of the United States was incredibly divisive. A rise in nationalistic viewpoints that bordered on racism and domestic terrorism were unfolding on the news every day. I like to point out that I'm Canadian, despite the utilization of a Union Jack in my logo. Note to self, get a new logo. But turning to the 24-hour news cycle, it felt like the presidential election was going to blow the US up. Slapping down a Far Cry game, which has normally taken place in foreign vistas against equally foreign antagonists, but this time in America with an American antagonist and utilizing theology to bring about his own ends, felt like it was going to provide some stance on the insanity currently going on in the electoral race, and by all accounts, was somewhat marketed like it would. When it didn't, it really took the wind out of its sails. Far Cry 5, in fact, is trying so hard not to take a stance on politics that it ends up doing that. The Project at Eden's Gate is a doomsday cult in rural Montana that happens to be uncharacteristically progressive in its recruitment policy. They don't discriminate between black or white, to which I'm calling bull. Cults primarily operate on dividing their unit from the rest of society. An incredibly easy way to do that would be to physically divide people. Skin tone, culture, militarizing your group into believing the other side are the crazy ones, disavowing all responsibility to prevent you from taking the blame. By including a multi-ethnic doomsday cult, it gives the idea that Ubisoft isn't trying to offend white nationalistic individuals with racist tendencies. Wait, let me watch the 30-minute live-action trailer. If there are cultists who are of mixed ethnicity in it, then I'll go out and get a tramp stamp. The Project at Eden's Gate couldn't be any more white if they were bleached. Also, why is Joseph giving orders to Jacob? Jacob's an army veteran. Show all of the Seed family as dangerous. Don't downplay the other villains in your story. Look, maybe I'm reading too much into this. Maybe Ubisoft is just so soulless that they only care about money, and thus this entire criticism is pointless because they just wanted to make their audience as broad as possible and damn artistic integrity. Sure. When making a video game, there are multiple branches that work together to create it. When something narratively screws up, it's usually a result of a disconnect between writers, directors, and the executive branch, aka studio interference. Out of all branches, I primarily have a ridiculously short fuse with the executive branch. This is in part because a lot of their decisions are centered around profit versus making a meaningful experience to players. For example, introducing a currency that has no carryover to future games is a good way to completely piss me off. At that point, you're not even trying to pretend that you have any honor in your shady business practices. We all know why you decided to put that in your game. Shame on you! The voice actors did their job well, Greg Brick as Joseph Seed being the clear standout, which is why I'm not going to throw any of them under the bus in this part. You see, all the work of a great actor is mediocre if those other three departments drop the ball. In my honest opinion, because let's face it, I am not humble, that's exactly what happened. There's way too much padding to make Far Cry 5 enjoyable. As I mentioned before, I dislike the catch and release narrative structure of the lieutenants, but did you know that's not the worst storytelling problem in the game? You can completely skip over key missions through aimlessly wandering around the map. If I get bored and attempt to shoot random Peggies, sometimes freeing strongholds, or even finding random hostages, it affects the meter that triggers confrontations with the lieutenants. Instead of getting lost in the wilderness of Montana, I'm trying my damnedest to focus entirely on the story missions so I don't miss out. That's an incredibly poor thought out creative decision which ultimately ruins the concept of exploring the wilderness. So here lies Far Cry 5, the mediocre game that made me stop caring about Ubisoft. It was poorly written, awkwardly executed, and at times felt like it wasn't even trying. I don't know who is to blame, and frankly, I don't care anymore. This game is the reason why I'm starting to file my review purchases as tax deductible. Because if it wasn't for the fact that I knew I was making a video for YouTube, I would have tried to return this and got something better. I'm SonicMTD, and I'm still confused why Montana by Frank Zappa wasn't used in this. This video was proudly supported by Unsung Heroes of Patreon. Hey everybody, Matthew Tyler DeLeo, better known as SonicMTD. Thank you so much for catching the first ever episode of One Shots where I covered Far Cry 5. If you liked the video, please be sure to like and subscribe. And if you didn't like it, please be sure to leave me a comment down below. I am expecting a lot of hate mail for this. But despite that, I do hope that some of you guys did enjoy it. Now, if you take a look at this side of the webpage, up here is going to be whatever YouTube recommends that you should watch, and down here is going to be probably either a collection of Always Right reviews or future episodes of One Shots. I haven't quite decided yet, but we will figure that out. Either way, thank you so much for watching this video. I'm Matthew Tyler DeLeo, better known as SonicMTD. Arigato gozaimasu, and later days.